Hello, everybody. This is Dan, aka Containment WF, aka Page Wizard, aka blah. Anyways, I'm back from my holidays. I was sick for most of it, but I am back. So we're going to be here talking about all sorts of stuff. In particular, as you can see in the title over there, it's going to involve fan games. We're going to talk about a couple of cases and a couple of things that have come up in the news that I thought would be relevant. And I haven't seen anybody talk about this in a particular way. In particular, I find that this discussion tends to be very biased in one way, so I want to kind of bring it back to about the middle, hopefully. Also, I wanted to bring light to a couple of things that I think that people do need to know about. In particular, this discussion about, remakes and fan games and ROMs and all of this stuff. And no, I'm no legal expert. I'm just somebody that's very interested in these things. At the same time, of course, if I do get something wrong, do let me know. I'll be more than happy to apologize. And also, I want, especially if you are more legally inclined and knowledgeable in that way, you may let me know if you have anything that may needs to be clarified a bit further. But I'm just going to try avoiding having these very complicated legal discussions. Instead, I want to focus on more on the basics, because this is really what it's about. Things that are really obvious. Though a lot of this discussion does have gray. Lots and lots of it. So that's why we have to have this discussion, and we have to be very careful when we have this discussion. So let's get started here. So first, what I'm not here to say. I'm not here to say that every fan game creator is like some sort of hero or something. I find a lot of these discussions tend to vilify the copyright owner, and they tend to vilify, or I guess intellectual property holder as well. They tend to vilify the person that is taking the project down, whether it be through a cease and desist letter or an order. Note there is a distinction between those two things. And just a copyright infringement letter. So it's worth noting that I'm not here to defend those individuals. I'm only here for the facts. But at the same time, I'm not here to say that, every cease and desist is reasonable. There's sometimes where it is totally inappropriate. Sometimes it is. That's very important to note here, because some people like to say, it's either one or the other. You can't be both. No, this is a discussion that has a gray area. But the topics I'm going to discuss tend to more have a black and a white. But I do want to point out that there are examples of people using cease and desist and intellectual property and copyright infringement takedowns to, suppress things. For instance, freedom of speech, variety of other things. For instance, businesses pointing out shoddy practices of other businesses. In particular, I put a link in the description to something that describes some of these examples, if you have the time to read something a little bit more lengthy. Also, I'm not here to glorify or apologize for people. I know there's a lot of fandom that goes one way or the other. I'm not here to have that discussion. I'm here to talk a little bit about fan games, because that's what I'm very interested in. That's my hobby. And I know a lot of you guys subscribe to my channel to talk about this stuff. So I think this is very relevant, because I know you guys follow other fan projects too, and I want you to follow mine as well. But we have to conduct ourselves in an ethical way, because when you make fan games, you do people have to understand there is a line. It's very subjective, but we got to try to be as objective as possible when it comes to this. And so that means that we can't just simply blame the holder of the copyright. We also have to put some blame on fan game makers as well, and that is oftentimes completely left out of the discussion. For example, if you know an intellectual property owner says, I don't like people making stuff out of my IPs, my intellectual property, like I want to make some sort of remake or something. If you know that company really, really is strict on these things, do you think you should make a fan game involving that character and put it on the internet? Also, we have to also make this. I also have to make this point. ROMs, fan games, emulation. These are very different discussions. A ROM is not the same as a fan game. This is often something that people that aren't as fluent about these things tend to confuse, and oftentimes muddies the waters of this discussion. Because the discussion on fan games is much more about copyright and intellectual property issues, not piracy issues. Or, say, for instance, when somebody takes something that already exists and modifies the existing code to do something else. That's another discussion. That's a completely different discussion. And that is one that you talk about with emulation and ROMs, which I'm not going to be discussing here, with this gray area attached to it. But you can't treat them the same, because a ROM is where typically the intellectual property owner, the copyright holder of that code, or say for instance the art and sprites, music and all that stuff, they originally programmed that, usually. And then what the person that's taking the ROM and hacking it is doing is they're modifying pre-existing code that the intellectual property owner, typically created to do something else. That's a little bit different than a fan game, where typically it's an application, piece of software that somebody has written or has taken somebody's code with credit, hopefully, if we're talking about and assuming the ethical practices of this, and has distributed it in a way that it's their own stuff, typically. So the discussion is about the content of the game, not the code itself. So that's why we have to have this discussion and split them in half, because people tend to go like this, lump them together, when that's not really accurate to do. You could talk about is software in general, which there is a lot of law attached to that, but that's not the discussion we're having here. So let's get started here. Start with this one. You may know about Project AM2R. So this one right here is a remake of the Metroid 2 game on the Game Boy, which is very cool. I think that this project's very interesting. I played it for a little bit. I thought it looked great. In fact, it looks just like an official Game Boy Advance kind of game, or something interesting there. They took a Game Boy game and modernized it effectively in a particular style, which is cool. I think that's very interesting. But, and note that so this project here, oh yeah, just for those that don't know about this, I maybe should tell you. If you want to go to this blog here, I'll put a link in the description. Also, by the way, all the fan games that I'm discussing, I'll have links in the description. So this game actually got a copyright, a DMCA notice from Nintendo, taking their download links down. So they say that they have not received a cease and desist letter, but they've been working on this for quite some time. I don't know enough about the project itself to really comment too much on it, but it's still very cool. And people are still keeping the links pretty alive, so you probably could find it. But now, there's something I do need to discuss about this. When you make a remake, you're treading some really dangerous water when it comes to if you want your game to be out there in the public. Depending on which publisher you're talking about, and especially if they have games that are still commercially sold, you're going to probably see something of this nature happen to your project. It's almost guaranteed. So this is something that a fan game maker has to keep in mind. If you make a remake, remakes are really notoriously taken down by companies. Why? Because oftentimes they sell the game still, or they really have a strong protection over, say, the particular IP in question. Nintendo is very infamous for this. I don't consider everything they do is perfect. But, as I said earlier, but they were totally in the right to do this. In fact, the fan game maker acknowledges that if we go a little bit further down. In fact, the fan game creator is very positive about this, which is great. I'm all cool with that. So, for example, I say, please don't hate Nintendo for all of this. It's their legal obligation to protect their IP. Instead of sending hate mail, get the original Metroid 2 from the eShop. Some of them show them that 2D adventure platformers are still a thing people want. See this is great. But even then, you'll still find people vilifying Nintendo, like, oh, they're so bad for doing this. It's so unreasonable. Like, no, this is a completely legit thing, because you have to defend your intellectual property. That's sort of how it works. It's not your intellectual property if you just let anybody use it. At least if you wanted to defend the case that you own this thing, you have to stand by it. And keeping in mind that Nintendo makes a lot of money off their intellectual property, they have to do this. So this is my message to fan game creators in particular: do not make remakes if you want them to stand and be out there in the public, unless you're willing to accept this as a consequence. And now I'm not saying that any fan game is safe from a cease and desist or a copyright infringement letter. What I'm saying is that if you wanted to take the scale and say, oh, which game is going to be the most safe for me to make and spend thousands of hours in, and make it so that people can share this without people going after my stuff and shutting it down, you have to make it clear. And so if you have a completely original project, remake would be basically up here on the risk level. So, for example, this isn't the only one. Like Super Mario 64 HD got the same thing that happened to them. They got themselves a copyright infringement notice as well. And like I said, like if you looked at this, like you could, because a lot of people don't seem to understand. They have this sort of entitlement attached to it. They say, oh, it's a fan game, it's free, so people could download it, so they could play it and all that stuff, which is great. And of course they cannot sell it, which we're going to get to later on. But the issue here is that if this is a remake of something that Nintendo sells, you're putting yourself in a position where somebody's going to shut down you. Like, it's just common sense. But I commend the fan game creators for making this. I encourage you, if you can find it, to download it. But I encourage you to also play the original. And so you can see the difference between the two, especially if you can go purchase it. I enjoy it. It's been a long time since I played it, though. That being said, if we want to talk about that fine line here, remakes, very dangerous to make if you want to keep your project on the internet. Nintendo is not the only one that does this to fan game creators. There are several companies that do this. In fact, Nintendo is actually not that bad if you actually were to look around. It's normally the remakes that Nintendo goes after, but that's not always the case. I don't want to be so certain on that. But there's numerous Mario fan games that do exist, and Nintendo has not taken them down. Why? I don't know. Well, I can't tell you what Nintendo thinks, but I could suggest something. It's one, it's not in direct competition with them, and two, usually the fan game creator does something a bit more original with their project. Be creative. Now, I'm not saying that this project isn't creative. They did a lot of new things. They added some more bosses. They've done a whole bunch of things. But the thing is, it's been advertised that way. And it reached critical mass. Nintendo wants to make money off their original things. It's just inevitable. It's just going to happen. So, now this isn't the only time, of course. So like we had the Super Mario 64 HD. These are examples for Nintendo. There isn't a really long lineage of this. But they aren't the only company in town that's done this for remakes. In particular, one good example, and I want you to look up this, I'll put in the link in the description, is there's a fan game called Chrono Resurrection, which is a 3D remake of Chrono Trigger. Very nice looking. Very nice. I'll put the trailer down in the description. Check it out if you haven't heard of it. There's an example, Square Enix going after that. In fact, Square Enix is one of those other companies that you'd want to avoid. Capcom is surprisingly very good when it comes to fan games. That's why I make Mega Man fan games, because I know it's safe, typically. Now, there is a threat to this, though. If people do, because the fan game creators typically act very ethically, though there has been a recent trend I've noticed of people not crediting things properly. See my other video that I did. I'll put that in the description as well, where I discuss a little bit of this issue with credits and, spiteful behavior. But But the real thing that could really damage the Mega Man fan game community is when a fan game creator asks for money from people. And that's what I want to talk about now. So we're going to go to this Patreon page right here. So this is so now this is not a personal attack. I really want to make that clear because YouTube does have policies involving this. This is just me trying to put information out there so people are aware of these things and know that this stuff is happening, and maybe you can encourage them to stop this behavior. But I am completely against people doing illegal things. Because fan games are normally tame things. People don't do them for commercial profit or anything. That's the fan games are not meant for that. Fan games are these creations people make so that they can say, for instance, they want to pick on something that they enjoyed from their childhood, or they want to build something and make their own little story and adventure. Maybe they want to make a fun game using some of their favorite characters. Usually it's very tame. Not for money, non-commercial. Usually, if you do that, you're pretty safe. If you credit everything that you use, as in not where you got it from, but who made things. I have a big issue with the practices that are being used here. So this is the Patreon page of this fan game creator, and just out of morbid, it's worth noting it here, is that this Patreon page actually originally had a different URL. It had its fan games name as the URL. It originally had that. This was before I just started to discuss with him and try to bring my concerns to him. Or him or her, I don't know. I don't know that information. I have been following this one a little bit. So it is a Mega Man X fan game. So I do go around looking for fan projects and looking at them and all kinds of stuff. That's what I normally do. I paid for it. So this is a trailer. All rights belong to Capcom, so they say that. All rights belong to Capcom, so they say that in this video. Got this trailer. Yeah, this one has a whole bunch of new armors and that. It's pretty neat. I can't really comment on too much stuff. I'm kind of concerned that this music may be copyright. Give me some sort of issues. But still, it's a pretty neat trailer, especially for a fan game. Now, the first thing you gotta ask yourself is, what is this Patreon's purpose? So let's take a look at this. So Mega Man ZX51 are creating games. So I'm creating fan games. Mega Man X Maverick's Fury. So let's see. It says goals create more games and complete the full Mega Man X Maverick's Fury. So this Patreon's purpose is for making his fan games and making games and completing this fan game, because he says, I'm creating fan games. So, that being said, he has on his Patreon feed all of his fan game videos. He doesn't have, all I could see is just stuff from the Maverick Fury game. So that being said, we have a whole bunch of stuff here. It has a lot of things here. And by the way, I want to acknowledge this, and so that if they're watching this video, I do hope that your fan game gets completed and all that, but I just do not. This really rubs me the wrong way. That being said, I gotta talk about some things. In fact, I do think that you shouldn't be using Patreon for this, and I will be explaining that very carefully. So right now, this fan game creator is accepting money for making fan games, which I think is a big problem, because if you look right here, if you pledge some money to this fan game creator, so benefit of being a donor, you'll have access to, to prove alphas and demos before his launch. I'm pretty sure the fan game creator isn't an English-speaking native. But I can't always assume these things. Just this is not particularly well written. Will be Tester's official and will be in the credits. Special thanks of the game. So if you give them money, they'll put your name in the special thanks of their game, and they'll give you demos and alphas for testing purposes, and access to e-special items of the game, only for donators. Engine Open can edit the game. So if you give them $10, you can get all of these perks. Now, that being said, if you give them money, they give you something. That's an exchange for the money that you're giving them. Now, that in itself is very, very shifty. You're exchanging money for the fan game and contents pertaining to that fan game. So why exactly is this a problem? Well, I'm pretty sure this sits on the line of something that it would be considered illegal in some aspect. Now, I don't want to say anything too strongly. I'm just saying it's about there, I'd say. But I do know as a fact that this violates Patreon's terms of service. So, your information. So this is section 11 of the legal terms of use of Patreon. Your information is defined as any information and materials you provide to patreon.com or other users in connection with your registration for and use of the service, including without limitation that posted or transmitted for use in public areas. You are solely responsible for your information. We act merely as a passive conduit for your online distribution and publication of your information. So it's worth noting here at this point, because I'm not going to need to read this whole thing. But your information is the information and materials you provide to Patreon and users on Patreon. So the information and materials described in this section, as provided by each user, is collectively referred to herein as user-generated content. You hereby represent and warrant to Patreon that your information, A, will not be false. I don't think that's an issue. B, I don't think that's really an issue. I don't think there's any counterfeit thing. But C here, this is the issue. Will not infringe any third party's copyright, patent, trademark, trade secret, or other proprietary right or right of publicity or privacy. Yeah, so that's already an issue. So that being said, because as far as I know, because I've asked this person, I wasn't able to get any more information out of this, but if they have special permission from Capcom to use Mega Man in this game, as in it's like Capcom has given them written permission to use Mega Man in their game. And note, that's not a blessing, I mean legal permission to use this. Because this is not what I would consider non-commercial. You're taking in money for a service. You're giving them betas and stuff and testing and giving them special features for your game. That's, as far as I know, currency. You're giving something. You're doing a financial exchange. This violates Patreon's terms of service. Worth noting that Section 15, if you're curious about this, it does give an email to contact them if somebody believes that they're violating somebody's copyright. I'm just mentioning that here. This should not be on Patreon. It's very, very shifty. I'm gonna be blunt. It's very shifty. And now, but bet you're wondering, okay, well, why am I talking about this? Why would I talk about and try to say, oh, well, this person is taking in money for making a fan game and all this stuff? Well, this fan game is being funded by people directly in exchange for stuff. Now, why is this an issue? Now, this is mostly a message, and this is why I've been making these videos lately, is if you guys cannot be ethical, as in crediting everything, being very intellectually lazy, or doing stuff way worse like this, Capcom is going to stop letting us make fan games. I will say that. Like, if they see a financial deficit, something that will say, hey, look, if people are giving people money to do this. Now, it's worth noting that this just says $43. But before this whole discussion that I had with him, I believe they actually had more money coming in. Let me see here. Yeah, it was $121. So that being said, I'm telling you, like that's over $1,000 in a year, for making something that's supposed to be just non-commercial. It has nothing to do with making money. Like, fan games are not supposed to be for that. Now, that's why I'm making this stuff, because you guys need to know not to do unethical things, whether it be not crediting who made things, accepting money from people in exchange for things. Now, I'm not going to say anything about donations, because I do not know enough about like this stuff to say anything about how donations work exactly. But I do know as a fact that this is wrong. Like, you just can't do this stuff. But they also are accepting donations, by the way, through PayPal. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the conversation I had with this individual. The creator of this game. So let's actually, before that, I just want to make sure I got everything. I think I covered everything on the Patreon page. But the main point here is that it seems like they're evading the discussion. But just to motivate the discussion here, I'm going to just show you a little snippet of this discussion. So let me pull this up. So in response to what I basically been telling you, I'll get into that in a moment. His point was, don't worry, my friend. Capcom hates Mega Man. Now, I did actually make a video about this whole discussion of people being so spiteful against Mega Man. I'll put that video in the description as well. Well, you guys may find it a little bit of an interesting other opinion. But the main point here is that we need to. That's not an excuse to do what you're doing. I'm sorry. You can't accept money from people in exchange for goods. Especially if you don't own the intellectual property rights and the copyright, or at least have the permission to do so. Now, of course, if you have this permission, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to apologize, because these are pretty strong accusations. So let's get into this discussion, because I don't want to waste too much of your time. So let's see. So this conversation, by the way, if you're curious, I'm going to give you the donators video, which has this in the comment section, in the video description, if you want to follow along. In case anything is deleted here, I took screenshots. So I say, I have a bit of an odd question for you. You do realize you can't make money off of making your fan game, right? So why are you using Patreon? It could be considered illegal if the intent of your Patreon is I think I missed an is to ask for money for your fan game. I suggest maybe looking into this if what I'm saying is true. Note, I did ask that intentionally as kind of a bait question, because I knew that Patreon didn't let this stuff through. At least they shouldn't be. So they respond, actually, not is illegal. I'm creating games, and the goal is to repair the PC designer of games to create more fan games. Don't worry, my friend. So they're using this money to rebuild or repair a PC, it seems. This is getting worse. Okay. So I said, are you sure? Sections 11 and 14 of their terms and service seem pretty cut and dry about copyrighted materials and intellectual property, as we saw. Now, Fate Epsilon, if you're watching this, thanks for actually contributing to this discussion. I really appreciated it. Because I don't know if... It seemed like he made some of a dent. So I appreciate your contribution to this discussion. So I'm gonna tell you what they've said. Fate Epsilon says, well, the real question is this game going to be free or do you have to donate to get the game? Now, this wasn't really the focal point of what I was saying, but it's a fair point. From what I know, no, that's not. But they clarify this later. But let's proceed a little further. So that is one among other questions. That is a stronger question than the one I'm curious about. I'm a fan game maker, and the idea of doing this rubbed me the wrong way. Correct. Fan games are strictly non-commercial. You cannot make money off from them directly. It's illegal to do so. Either way, if you read the terms of service literally, building a Patreon to fund a fan game seems out of the question because Mega Man X is owned by Capcom. Very obvious. And I'm pretty sure the fan game maker does not have permissions to use their intellectual property. The Patreon could be remedied if it were about funding the partner's channel, as many YouTubers do, because you can do that for your videos, because he does make videos, he does LPs and stuff as well. So as a fan game maker myself, I am just warning them that using a Patreon in this way is very shifty and could cross some lines that fan games should never cross ethically, just like we've discussed. And Fate Epsilon says, good call, just check the Patreon and civil process. So we already talked about this. Actually, there's a little bit more here that was there originally before. Access to Absolute Zero, only for donators. So that was there before. So he clarifies, the game is free, but you need to get the full version. I need to wait to get the full version because it is under design. Oh, and the donation benefits, I keep saying benefits, but benefits is for all games if I create more, not just for Maverick's Fury. Which, this is a big if they were doing that, I would not be making this video. They're only been making this fan game. And that's the only thing I see on their Patreon feed. They could be making other stuff, but it's not on this Patreon feed. And that's a big issue. Even then, they should not be accepting any money for this fan game stuff. Only for their original games. That's it. That's it. So let's proceed. So I said, yes, but you're accepting money for it. And Patreon is a platform for funding projects or people to do projects. I'm unsure how donations work from a legal standpoint, as I've already said. I'm not commenting on that, but I can at least comment on profiting off a fan game and Patreon. Give them perks for giving you money. That's an exchange, as we said. That could get you in a lot of trouble if Capcom finds out, and it, as mentioned before, violates the terms of service of Patreon. They just don't know because you haven't made it clear that Capcom owns Mega Man on your page, which is dishonest. One point I didn't mention. The first thing people see on your page is Mega Man X and your fan game. The benefits also involve your fan game. That's soliciting money for a fan game, something that has intellectual property you do not own, which can get you in trouble. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm warning you that you can get in some hot water with Capcom, or even a cease and desist if they find out you're making money off a game off their game series. I should have said series there, directly with your fan game. That is not the same as making videos, though, which is why I suggested modifying your Patreon to be funding your content on your channel and not the fan game. You may ask, why should this matter to me? And this is really the point I was making earlier, and I've already went into this, so I'm not going to read that part. Basically, if this happens, and this becomes a consistent thing, because people see this and say, oh, well, this guy did it, so it's okay. Just the same way that some of the games that I pointed out didn't have really good credits at that point in time. I don't know if they've been updated at all since then. But if people act in this unethical way, whether it be not crediting people appropriately or accepting money like this, people are not going to be able to make Mega Man fan games anymore if Capcom finds out. Capcom has a fairly good relationship with fan game makers. We don't want to ruin that. So whether you're a fan game maker, whether you're just a fan, I encourage you guys, if you guys see this kind of stuff, and you do know, say maybe you're on Capcom Unity, do point this out to somebody, because this is totally out of line. But yeah, there's the excuse that Mayhap's like, I don't think he's willing to listen. And then I say that doesn't excuse what you're doing. If somebody is a jerk to somebody, I can't steal their things and make money off of them. I'm sorry. On a relevant note, I think Capcom does care about about Mega Man personally. That's my opinion, at least. See my video about that. So, and note it's a little bit older. So they say, I'm not stealing. I'm not stealing nothing. Keep calm, bro. Okay, so he's saying, I'm not stealing nothing. That's a... Okay, that's... I think that's a double negation there. Does that mean you're stealing something? Yeah. Anyways, that's just sort of a weird thing going on there. Keep calm, bro. All projects and donations is for Mega Man ZX. Read and see more the name of fan page, and Patreon. Well, just putting your name there does not negate what you're doing on the Patreon. I saw what you did with the URL. You changed the URL intentionally in response to what I did and what I told you. That doesn't fix the issue here. You're asking for perks. Keep in mind, I'm not saying that donating and this stuff, I don't know enough about that, but I definitely know enough about this. So Fate Epsilon's like, I agree with Dago on this whole profit thing. Plus the donators are get more for paying for a free game is kind of a dick move if you ask me. That opinion I can't agree with. Can't be making money off of this stuff. I hate the sound so patronizing, but you just can't. You're not supposed to, at least. As for Capcom liking or hating Mega Man, that's theirs, and they can do or not do whatever they like with their franchise. You should really just hear Dago out and revise how you make your profit, especially since this game is getting bigger and bigger, publicity-wise. Keep in mind that at the time of making this video, this fan game creator has about twice as many subscribers than I do, and they've been growing quite rapidly. Keep in mind, I've been on YouTube for like 10 years. This has only been around, I think at most, a couple years. The game is free. I don't know what... Oh yeah, no. I gotta finish reading this comment. I mean, even if you finish this game and release it before Capcom figures it out, I do believe they could still take you to court and sue you for this. I may be off, but I wouldn't put it past them. They are a business before they are developers after all. Good point. Like I said, I don't know enough about what Capcom's incentives are. I already made some suggestions in some of my previous videos, but that's not really the point here. So he says the game is free. I don't know what's the problem. Okay, remember, you give him $10. He gives you stuff for the game. That's the thing. It's not fully free. Here, I'll paste it over again, and I've already went through this. You don't own Mega Man or anything related to it legal-wise. Therefore, you cannot make money off it without their permission. That's right, but it is for codes and testing, not for the game. Well, okay. That's a really goofy argument. You're giving them demos and you're giving them testing stuff. That's software. You're still exchanging a good with them. Whether it be a good or service, whether you're giving them giving them testing stuff. Or you're providing a service, i.e., you give them money, you make game. That's still an exchange. I have no problem with copyrights. No. You still have problems with copyrights. Heck, even my own fan game, I still technically am violating copyrights of people because I'm using, say, Mega Man, his likeness, his characters. I'm still using these things to make my own game. But here's the thing. The difference here is I'm not making money off of it. But anyways, that's the end of the discussion, at least what's relevant here. There was a couple other posts in there. I didn't quite understand the language because it was, I think, Spanish. But if you're a Spanish speaker, feel free to go check out the discussion, the comments in that thread. So with that being said, hopefully this gave you some idea why I make these videos involving fan games. Thank you guys for watching, and have yourself a beautiful day.